Hello, everybody out there, and thanks for joining us for the third in the IBM RTP Tech Series. I'm Jamie Thomas here at IBM. I'm a general manager, and I'm joined once again by my co-host that you met in the previous episode, Bala Rajaraman, who is an IBM Fellow. And we have a special guest with us here today, Jason McGee. And so, Jason, I'd like for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited for our conversation. I'm Jason. I'm also an IBM Fellow and CTO for IBM Cloud. So spend my day on as a service and platform topics for IBM.
Okay, so I take it that you're not too busy, actually.
No.
Not very busy.
No, nothing going on as always.
So we wanted to continue the discussion that we had in some of the other episodes. As you recall, we started in our first episode with AI transformation, and then we kind of journeyed into a discussion with Bill Higgins around what is the role of the developer in this new world of artificial intelligence. And today we'd like to continue that journey and talk a little bit about creating the agentic enterprise. This is one of the hot topics out there in the business world. Everyone is talking about agentic and what makes it a reality for their organization. And I wanted to start with Jason first, and then Bala, your commentary on what is the definition of an agentic enterprise or an agentic business?
Yeah, it's a hotly debated topic, I think, at the moment on as everyone tries to adapt and figure out how they want to kind of introduce these tools and systems into their environment. I think of it in two layers. One is like, how do we all do work in an enterprise? How do we communicate? How do we share information? How do we keep in sync with each other? A lot of how an enterprise works is really wired around how people work and share information. And we're introducing kind of agents into our teams. That's how I think about agents. Like, agents are team members, not tools. And so rethinking an agentic enterprise is really about rethinking how all that data and work flows around the organization. That's one angle. I think the other angle is, okay, developers is one role. Yeah. What about operations? What about other roles? And how do agents transform those other roles?
Jason, you had a really interesting phrase there. One way to think about how the agentic enterprise works is how do they transform roles? Mm-hmm. So people are going to move more and more from production to defining intent, and the agents do the production or the work. So again, that's a different way of looking at it from a process lens. And I think that was a really profound way of expressing it, which is let agents do the work. Let's guide it. Let's iterate through it. Let's make sure that the right guardrails are there. So that's another interesting way of looking at it.
And that was a little bit of what I was thinking. I mean, clearly in this world of artificial intelligence, there's been a lot of discussion about security and this idea of, do we keep the human in the loop, or how autonomous do these agents become over time? And what is your view of that? I mean, because you described a little bit of autonomy there in your
I think it's an interesting debate. And I also believe strongly that we're going to start to use agents in I'll say more critical situations. Like if I want an agent managing my production system, that's a different level of responsibility than I'm using an agent to write code that I'm going to check into my GitHub repo. And so accountability of those autonomous systems is important. I do think people need to stay in the loop right now. That doesn't necessarily always mean that agents are interactive and someone is sitting there at the keyboard saying yes, but like we have to maintain, like, what do we want that person to do? Maybe it's not that different than how you manage teams. Like you have a team, somebody manages that team and is deciding who's doing what and how they're doing it and whether we're following through on our commitments. And I think the same thing applies in agents. The question is, how do you make that real, and how do you feed institutional knowledge to the agent that's needed for it to do a good job at whatever task you've given it?
And I think two really good points. One, it's over time, so it's going to mature over time. Yeah. But I think your analogy of managing teams is really good, because what does a manager do? Provide context. Mm-hmm. So I think as these agents work, you're refining their behavior, providing context. Over time, that context will become more and more discoverable by the agents themselves, so they'll get smarter and smarter. But I think an orchestrator, at least as we begin, is going to provide context that's not discoverable or decipherable by the agent. And that leads to this whole question of data. Is data AI ready? Yeah. Right. How does data become context is going to be a really interesting set of progressions.
Well, I'm hearing a little bit of trust but verify.
Yes.
They're all saying trust but verify. And so I think the feedback loop or the verification loop here has to be defined at some point.
Yeah. I think a lot of these agentic systems really thrive on having clear evaluation, like a clear way to measure success at whatever task so that the agents can iterate and problem solve and like work towards that answer. And like, frankly, I think a lot of us as people, we think we're clear in our instructions, but we're actually not that clear in our instructions. And like, so there's also a skill for all of us on like, how do you express intent clearly? Yeah. How do you provide measurable outcomes that an agent system can use? And how do you provide that context into the agent to make that happen?
So, Bala, you've had a lot of experience on the feedback loop, even for the systems that we've already created here at IBM, right?
Yeah, it's always been interesting. And one of the analogies that come to mind is once upon a time, even before the age of AI, we had in our past jobs that we shared, a patch management solution. And this patch management solution would go out and patch the system at 2 a.m. on a Saturday. Unfortunately, on one Saturday, planes were delayed and stuff like that, and people were working just before Christmas to unload packages, etc. And our system decided to go out and reboot the systems and apply patches. So the feedback loop is important because you have to understand how, in which context are you operating, be able to revalidate some of these assumptions and come up with new plans, reason through it. And that feedback loop is really, really critical.
Yeah, I think in the world of IBM software, there's always a few rules. Update nothing, the weeks before the holiday, right? Don't do any of that. Autonomous agents.
That's important context.
We all like to sleep and go on vacation sometimes.
Important context for sure. So I think one of the things that every organization is struggling a bit is what are some concrete steps to making this transformation successful? So if you all had to think about what you would recommend to individuals, leaders out there, and businesses, what would be some of those steps?
For me, I actually think the one that's been on my mind the most right now is like really thinking about how we currently work as people and where the data and information flows in your team and pushing it into some place that an agent could possibly access. Like if you're doing it all in like a direct message, pairwise conversations and Teams meetings and with your team and hall conversations, like those work for people, but don't work that great for agents, right? And so getting practice on being more asynchronous in how we do work and doing work in forums that capture that data, the people part of the data. Like I think you talk about data a lot, but like we think of that as, systems of record or backend systems or whatever, technology data systems, but where's all the people information? Because that's actually all the context that these systems will need to be able to do a good job. And so for me, first step is like, where am I doing something today that I couldn't invite an agent into the loop?
Very good point.
Yeah, it's a very similar thought process. I mean, I think one of the important things is to kind of change how people think about agentic. So we think about agents as assistants, which is, I'm going to ask a question, I'm going to get an answer. I flip that on its head to say the agent does its work and it asks me a question when it needs clarification. The moment you take that lens, it changes what kind of transformation you need, how data has to transform, how cultures have to transform, how architectures have to transform. The primary actor becomes the agent, and we help the agents get the thing done. It's not the other way around. So,
yeah, I think that we've had a few good examples as well of how we're using this technology to do knowledge capture of individuals who are rare. They have a set of rare knowledge about a particular domain, and I think it's a particularly useful mechanism for that. I mean, you've done some of that, Bala.
Yeah. And scaling it is important, right? Because I think when you look at some of our missions where you're supporting mission critical systems, knowledge is key because you have to know about all of these things, all of the possibilities, and that's gained by subject matter experts across mainframes and power and storage and so on. How do you bring that knowledge together? And so your point, we've been doing a lot of that in terms of capturing past histories, some of our other documentation sources.
Yeah, I think many of us have been on that really intense bridge call when something went wrong and there's hundreds of individuals on there and all of a sudden somebody pulls a needle out of the haystack. But you're dependent on that one person to do it. And I think that's
hopefully they were awake and you
can that's right. And that's where you really need that knowledge capture.
Yeah.
Transformation of the culture. So talk to me a little bit more about what's going to really be required to get organizations to adopt this culturally.
Yeah, there's so many dimensions to that. The one that comes to my mind the most is maybe I always start with like, what's our individual behaviors? I have a colleague who uses this expression, the death of the quick question, meaning all of us have a behavior where like we want to know something and I go to Bala, I have a quick question for you and make you give me the information. But I think changing our behavior where we feel like more empowered to figure things out on our own, to use these tools, to answer the questions on our own, to let agents try to help us, doesn't mean you'll get there. There's expertise sometimes and you need to go to the expert. But like, are you changing your culture and behavior to be like everyone's an individual contributor, they're leveraging the tools, they're figuring it out on their own? I think by doing that, you train yourself to kind of use these new systems in new ways, and you actually uncover all the places where the system's not able to actually help you. And so we need to figure out how to help the agentic systems help us do our jobs.
Spot on. I mean, I think to me, the cultural transformation is not to ask questions, but to kind of express how you would reason about a problem. And when we talk about more concrete things like prompts and so on and so forth, it's like giving examples of how do you actually think through a problem? What are the steps and what information do you need to understand each of the steps? That is a change. It's easy for us to go ask someone a question. The chain of thought is embedded within that person. But as you have all these tools to let AI kind of express how it's thinking through the problem, you get to engage with it. So it's really a great time to be someone who's curious and learn about stuff.
You remind me in that of like this whole dimension of learning and discovery with each other is so fascinating in this space. Cause like I really firmly believe there's not like a set of best practices right now because the space is evolving so fast. So like, how do you share that in your team and discover? On one of the agentic projects we're working on, we built this weird feature which let you, while you were in an agent session, actually record the session like a movie recording, and like created a site where we can post that. And the whole idea was like, let's just share like interesting agent interactions and how we're solving the problem and how the agent responded. And it's been fascinating to watch. Like people use that as a place to like learn and discover, oh, I never would have thought to prompt it that way, or I didn't know it could do that. So like finding those vehicles to kind of get people to be curious and experiment and learn, I think is super important part of culture change.
Yep.
Really great perspectives. I heard a number of things in there. Unleash the individuals, set context and guardrails, have feedback loops. I was in an odd conversation a few weeks ago where we spent some time trying to determine how we would fire an agent if they had actually incurred the wrath of the organization.
Put the agent on a PIP or something.
Performance plan. I mean, it's a really unique opportunity in the future, perhaps. Well, any last comments?
That last comment was actually really interesting. I mean, I'm trying to interpret that technically, which is like, how do you put it on a performance improvement plan?
See, there's innovation, even for human resource teams and leaders out there. Lots of challenging things ahead.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, I think there was a very interesting conversation. Thanks, Jason, and thanks, Bala, again, for joining us here on the IBM RTP Tech Series. And we'll see all of you out there again in the near future.